Hi everybody, it's Teresa here. Hopefully by now you have also received your Love Notes week 1 in the mail. It's very exciting to get a little mystery project in the mail. So I have gone ahead and I have made my 3 applique blocks. So according to the instructions in the pattern, and they are really great. I'm still to trim them. They'll get trimmed this afternoon. I've completed one of my stitchery, so the sewing version, which is what I'm doing, has hand stitchery rather than machine embroidery. So I've completed one of the hand stitcheries, and I'm just going to go through the basic stitches that I've used when I complete the other one for you. So let me get that sorted and we'll get that stitchery underway. So I've got all my supplies here ready to start the hand embroidery on my second panel for week 1. I have traced my design onto the background fabric using a water-soluble marker. It's nice and easy to see the blue pen on the white fabric. I've also made sure that I've put all of the registration points on here, and they'll make it easy when we come to trim. On the back of my fabric, to make it more stable, I've actually added a layer of Cover It Up. So it's a very soft interfacing. It's got a little bit of movement in it, but it stops our threads showing when if we carry them across the back of our fabric, and we don't get any shadows. An alternative that you can use to cover it up is called Shape to Create. Now this is available from Echidna Sewing. It's a fusible interfacing. It's very, very lightweight, and it just cut it to size and iron it to the back of your fabric using the instructions that come with it. It's a great product. The other supplies that we're going to need is I like to use an embroidery hoop. We need some stranded cotton, some scissors, and of course a needle. So let's get started. I'm going to start with the back stitch, and I'm going to use my embroidery hoop starting with the letters. So I'm just going to pop that over the top, turn it over, and these spring hoops are perfect because you just simply turn it over, squeeze the spring, release, it fits in its little channel, and we're ready to start embroidering. I find it very hard to tighten a screw on a regular hoop, so I really like the spring hoops. So they come in 2 sizes, a 5-inch and a 7-inch. So let's zoom in a little bit and I will go through the stitches that we're going to use. We're essentially only going to use 3 basic stitches, a back stitch, a stem stitch, and we're going to do a French knot. So I've made a quick start on our back stitch for our embroidery, and I'm just going to move on to the next letter. So I've got my 2 strands of stranded cotton. I've got a little knot in the end of my thread. I'm using an embroidery needle for a nice sharp point, and I've popped my fabric into the hoop ready to go. So I'm just going to come up on my drawn line. Now a back stitch as it suggests. So we're just going to take our first small stitch. We're going to go straight down on the line. Now our next stitch, we're going to come up where we want our next stitch to be formed. So we're going to come up whatever length we want that stitch to be. If we're doing a tighter curve, we would do a smaller stitch. If we're doing a straight area, you can do a slightly longer stitch. So we're going to come up and we're going to go back down where our first stitch ended. So right in that same hole where our first stitch ended. And again, we're coming up where we want our next stitch to start, and we're going back down in the hole where our previous stitch ended. So back stitch is one of the most simple stitches, but it's very, very effective. It's very quick to do, and it gives you a lovely finish. So I'm just going to continue to work on these letters. We'll get those finished, and I'll show you how to do a stem stitch. So I've completed the back stitching for the first few words of the project. It's time to move my hoop along. I'm changing my threads, and we're going to complete the last section in stem stitch, and we're also going to add a couple of French knots for the dot for the eye and on the exclamation mark. So first off, I'm going to move my embroidery hoop. Now these are super easy hoops to use, so I just place it over the design where I want to work, flip it over, and our spring hoops, you just squeeze them in, squeeze, let go, and they're ready to go. So let's zoom in and start our stitching. Now stem stitch is a little bit different to our back stitch. It's actually the opposite side, so it's like a mirror image of our stem stitch. So I'm going to just come up in the beginning of the S, and I'm going to do a small stitch. Going to come back out exactly where I started my first stitch, and I'm going to make my stitch a longer stitch. So about twice as the length of my first little stitch, and I'm going to come back up where my first stitch ended. So I'm going to come up, you can see that's where my first stitch ended. I'm going to bring my thread through, and I'm going to take about the same length stitch, so I'm going to go down, which gives me a long stitch, and then I'm going to come back up where my previous stitch ended. So I'm actually coming up halfway through the stitch that I just made. I'm traveling along just a small amount, and if I leave this loop open rather than pulling it tight, I'm going to be coming back up where the previous stitch ends. Okay, so I'm going to come back up in through here, and I'll just pull that all the way through, and always on the same side. So I'm going to take a small stitch and go down. Got my thread off to the right hand side. I'm going to come back up where the previous stitch ended. Okay, and same thing. So I go down and I come back up where the previous stitch ends. So I'm going to continue with my stem stitch until I get all of the word completed, as well as the line for the exclamation mark, and we'll come back and we'll do the French knots. Just ready to do the last steps on our hand embroidery, and that's the French knots. So I've come up where my little dot is that I've got indicated to do my first knot. Got my thread attached. I'm going to wrap the thread around the needle twice, and I put the needle back into the fabric just beside where the thread comes up. Now it's got to be very, very close to where the thread comes up, but of course don't put it through the same hole or your knot will just pop through to the back. Pull the threads right down so they're really close to the fabric. So those wraps, they're right down close to the fabric. Hold it with your left hand or right hand, depending on which hand you're pulling the needle through with. Pull that thread through, and you'll have a beautiful, perfect French knot. So I'm going to do another one over here just to show you. I'm going to just carry this thread across. Normally I would knot my thread off and come back up to the top. Got a little tangle here. I'm going to bring my thread up to the top. Hold my needle in one hand and my thread in the other. Wrap it around the needle twice. Now it doesn't matter if you go clockwise or anti-clockwise. I'm going to take the needle back into the fabric just beside where the thread comes up. Pull the knot, pull the thread so it's sitting on top of the fabric. Hold it with my finger. Now my needle needs to go straight down. So I pull it straight down. Just gently pull my thread through, and I will have a perfect French knot. There you go. And we are done for week 1. Can't wait to see what week 2 brings, and we'll get another video done when we get our week 2 blocks.